Your daughter is gone, old man. Stop pretending this is still your family home. Sign the paper, take your boxes, and get out before I have you removed. That is what my son-in-law said to me in the church fellowship hall, 37 minutes after we buried my only child. His name was Blake Morrison, and he said it with one hand on my shoulder and the other hand pushing a pen toward me across a folding table covered in untouched ham sandwiches and lemon bars. My daughter's friends were still crying in the parking lot. Her favorite hymn was still echoing in my ears. And there he stood in his navy suit, whispering like he was doing me a kindness, telling a grieving father that his daughter's death had finally made me unnecessary. I looked down at the paper he wanted me to sign, a quitclaim deed. Then I looked at his face, calm, polished, almost bored, like the whole world was just an inconvenience standing between him and a check. I didn't yell. I didn't grab him by the collar. I didn't tell the pastor what he had just said to me beside my daughter's funeral guest book. I folded the paper once, put it in the inside pocket of my jacket, and said, "I'll have someone look at it." Blake smiled, because he thought that meant I was scared. He had no idea that paper was the last piece my attorney had been waiting for. He had no idea the lake house he had already promised to a developer had never belonged to him, never belonged to my daughter, and never would. And he certainly had no idea that by putting that deed in my hand, in front of witnesses, he had just given me everything I needed to end the lie he had been building for months. My name is Samuel Whitaker. I am 68 years old, and I live in northern Ohio, in a little town where the roads still have more soybean fields than traffic lights, and people wave from pickup trucks whether they know you or not. For 36 years, I worked in the county recorder's office. Deeds, mortgages, liens, easements, surveys, transfers, old family land disputes that started before I was born and outlived the people who started them. That was my world. People used to joke that I could smell a bad title from the parking lot. They weren't completely wrong. My late wife, Margaret, used to say I had ink instead of blood. She said I loved old documents because they couldn't flatter you, couldn't threaten you, couldn't cry, couldn't lie. A recorded deed simply sat there and told the truth, whether anybody liked it or not. Margaret died 6 years ago, just after Thanksgiving. A stroke took her in the kitchen while she was making cornbread dressing, and I still cannot smell sage without feeling my knees go weak. We had one child, our daughter, Laura. She was the kind of woman who remembered birthdays, brought soup to neighbors, and apologized to chairs when she bumped into them. She taught 4th grade for 17 years and kept every homemade card a student ever gave her in plastic tubs labeled by school year. Laura married Blake when she was 32. He was handsome in that smooth, practiced way some men learn early. Good teeth, good watch, good handshake. He sold commercial property for a while, then called himself an investor, then a consultant, then a redevelopment specialist. The titles changed whenever the money got thin. I never disliked him at first. That is the truth. I wanted my daughter to be happy, and she loved him in the way good women sometimes love difficult men, by explaining away the sharp edges until they cut themselves. He could be charming at dinners. He called me sir for the first few years. He told Margaret our lake place was the most peaceful property he had ever seen. That lake place was not a mansion. It was a cedar-sided house on 31 acres near a narrow blue finger of water called Hartwell Lake. My father bought the land in 1959 after coming home from Korea. Margaret and I rebuilt the house ourselves over 20 summers. I hung the porch swing. She planted the lilacs. Laura learned to swim off that dock wearing orange floaties and a serious expression like she was training for the Olympics. After Margaret died, the house felt too quiet for me year-round, so I stayed mostly in town and used the lake place on weekends. Then Blake's investment business hit what he called temporary turbulence, which meant creditors were calling and Laura was crying in her car before school. She asked if they could stay at the lake house for a few months while they got back on their feet. Of course I said yes. Family does not make family beg for shelter. But I did what I had spent my whole life doing. I put it in writing. Not because I didn't trust my daughter, because paper prevents confusion after grief gets involved. I wrote a simple family occupancy agreement. Laura and Blake could live there rent-free. They would pay utilities. I would continue paying taxes and insurance. No ownership would transfer. No renovations over $5,000 without my written permission. If Laura passed or moved out permanently, the agreement ended after 60 days unless I renewed it. Laura read it, hugged me, and said, "Dad, only you would make love legally organized." I told her love is safer when everybody understands the locks on the door. Blake signed it too. I watched him sign it at my kitchen table with the same silver pen he later tried to use against me. I watched his name dry on that page. He smiled when he signed, because he thought it was just old man paperwork. That was his first mistake. For 4 years, they lived in that house. Laura filled the porch with herbs in mismatched pots. Blake talked about unlocking value and underutilized acreage. I ignored most of it. Men like Blake speak in phrases they learn at seminars. They do not say home. They say asset. They do not say trees. They say timber value. They do not say family history. They say market, opportunity. Still, I kept peace for Laura. Then, one rainy Tuesday in April, my daughter collapsed in her classroom while reading Charlotte's Web to 23 fourth graders. A brain aneurysm. No warning, no goodbye. By the time I reached the hospital, she was already on machines, and Blake was in the hallway arguing with someone from his office about an inspection deadline. I do not say that to make him sound like a monster. I say it because that was the moment I first understood something had gone cold in him long before Laura died. The funeral was 3 days later. Blake took control of everything. He chose the casket. He chose the flowers. When I asked if we could display Laura's old class photo albums, he said, "Let's not turn this into a school open house." When I asked if her students could sing the little song they had practiced, he said the program was already full. He stood beside me at the church, greeting people as if he were running a fundraiser, shaking hands, accepting sympathy, checking his phone between hugs. I was too broken to fight over details. Brothers, sisters, fathers listening to me now, you may understand this. There are moments when grief does not make you loud, it hollows you out. You hear people making decisions around you, and you feel like you are underwater watching their mouths move. So I stood there in my black suit and let people tell me Laura was in a better place, though the only place I wanted her was standing beside me, complaining that the church coffee was too weak. After the service, people gathered in the fellowship hall. The women from church had made enough food for an army. Someone put a plate in my hand. I do not remember who. I remember staring at a scoop of potato salad and thinking Laura hated celery. That was when Blake touched my elbow and guided me toward the corner table. He did not look sad. He looked impatient. He said we needed to discuss practical matters. I told him this was not the time. He said time was exactly the problem. He said Laura would not want uncertainty. He said the lake property had become too much for me and too expensive for him. Then he slid the quitclaim deed across the table and told me signing it would make everything easier. I asked easier for whom. That is when his face changed. Not much. Just enough. He leaned close and said, "Your daughter is gone, old man. Stop pretending this is still your family home. Sign the paper, take your boxes, and get out before I have you removed." I felt something inside me go very still. Not calm. Not peaceful. Still. There is a kind of anger that shakes your hands, and there is another kind that turns every sound in the room clear as a bell. I heard the ice machine humming. I heard a child laughing in the hallway. I heard a fork drop into a trash can. I heard my own breathing, and I knew two things at once. First, Blake had been planning this before my daughter was in the ground. Second, I could not beat a man like him by shouting in a church basement, so I folded the paper, put it in my pocket, and let him think the old man had surrendered. But I want you to understand something clearly. I was not silent because I was weak. I was silent because Blake had finally stopped hinting and started proving. 3 days after the funeral, I drove to the lake house. My key no longer worked. I stood on the porch I had built with my brother in 1988 and stared at the new deadbolt. Through the front window, I could see that Margaret's quilt was gone from the back of the couch. The framed picture of Laura at age 7 holding a bluegill was no longer on the mantel. A cardboard box sat by the door with my name written on it in black marker. Not Dad. Not Sam. Just Whitaker. I knocked. Blake opened the door wearing jeans, bare feet, and my father's old University of Michigan sweatshirt. I had not seen that sweatshirt in years. It had been in the cedar chest in the guest room. He said, "You should have called first." I told him my key didn't work. He said he had changed the locks for security. Then he nudged the box toward me with his foot. Inside were Margaret's recipe tins, 3 photo albums, the little wooden loon Laura painted at summer camp, and a bundle of my old fishing rods with the reels tangled together like trash. I asked where the porch swing was. He said he took it down. It made the place look dated. I asked where Margaret's lilac bench was. He said a buyer wouldn't care about sentimental clutter. A buyer. That word landed harder than the funeral insult. I looked past him and saw a glossy folder on the entry table. Harbor Ridge Development. Concept Proposal. Hartwell, Lakeside Villas. There it was. Not grief, not confusion, not a widower overwhelmed by loss, a sale. He had already moved from mourning my daughter to marketing her childhood. I could have ended it right there. I could have told him about the occupancy agreement. I could have called the sheriff and my attorney and had him served before supper. Some of you would have, and maybe you would have been right, but the old recorder in me knew better. Blake had changed locks. Blake had handed me a deed. Blake had boxes by the door. But what I needed was the whole pattern, not one ugly thread. I needed the listing. I needed the developer communication. I needed witnesses. I needed him to put his false ownership claim somewhere official enough that he could not laugh it off later as grief or misunderstanding. So I picked up the box. Blake smiled again. That smile cost him more than he knew. The next morning, I called my attorney, Denise Calder. Denise had handled Margaret's estate and the trust I created after my wife died. She had gray hair, sharp eyes, and the patience of a woman who had listened to rich fools explain the law incorrectly for 40 years. I put the quitclaim deed on her desk. She read it once, then looked over her glasses and said, "He prepared this? Had it prepared?" I said, "He wants me to sign away the lake property. Does he understand he has no ownership interest?" He signed the occupancy agreement. Denise leaned back. "Then he understands enough." I told her about the locks, the developer folder, the boxes, the missing family items. I told her I wanted him out. I told her I also wanted the record clean, because Blake was the kind of man who could tell a lie with straight teeth and make half a room believe it. Denise asked me if I wanted quiet or correct. I said correct. She nodded slowly. "Then don't confront him alone again. Let him keep talking. Save every text. Photograph everything. If he schedules a meeting, we attend it. If he tries to close, we stop it in front of the people he lied to." That is the part I wish every quiet person could hear. Sometimes patience is not surrender. Sometimes patience is how you let a liar walk all the way into the light. Over the next 2 weeks, Blake gave us more than we asked for. He texted me that Laura had always intended for him to own the lake house. I replied only, "Send any documents you rely on." He sent nothing. He emailed me a list of items he said I could pick up before disposal. Disposal. As if Margaret's wedding china and Laura's school journals were garage debris. He sent a message saying Harbor Ridge had made a generous preliminary offer, and that I should avoid embarrassing the family by fighting the inevitable. He posted a photograph online of the lake at sunset with the caption, "Big changes coming. Laura would have wanted new life here." That one almost broke me. Laura would have wanted the lilacs watered. She would have wanted her students invited to fish off the dock. She would have wanted Blake to grieve like a husband instead of negotiate like a broker. Then came the open house. He did not call it an open house, of course. Men like Blake dress things up. He called it a private site evaluation. A neighbor, Mrs. Donnelly, called me that morning and said 6 cars were parked on the grass and a man in a hard hat was standing where Margaret's peonies used to be. I drove over, but I did not go alone. Denise followed in her car and parked down the road where Blake couldn't see her. When I walked up the driveway, Blake was standing near the dock with 3 men in branded fleece jackets and a woman carrying rolled survey maps. He had one hand lifted toward the tree line like a preacher blessing a congregation. "This section could be cleared for the first 4 units, he was saying. "The old house can come down clean. It's mostly emotional attachment at this point." Old house. Come down clean. Mostly emotional attachment. Brothers and sisters, there are phrases people use when they want to make destruction sound professional. Blake saw me and stiffened. Then he smiled for his audience. "Sam," he called out, too cheerful. "We're in the middle of something." I walked over slowly. My knees are not what they were, but that day they held. One of the men introduced himself as a project manager for Harbor Ridge. He said he was sorry for my loss, and that Blake had told them I was having some difficulty transitioning. There was that word again. Transitioning. The polite version of disappearing. I looked at Blake and asked, "Did you show them the deed?" The woman with the survey maps glanced up. Blake's smile thinned. This isn't the place. It seems like exactly the place, I said. He stepped closer and lowered his voice. Don't do this in front of people. I almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because there it was. He could throw my belongings into boxes, change my locks, and plan to bulldoze my wife's peonies in front of strangers, but the truth was suddenly impolite. I turned to the Harbor Ridge people and said, before you spend another hour on this property, ask him for recorded title. Then I walked back down the driveway. Behind me, nobody spoke for a long moment. Denise was waiting by her car. She had heard enough. She held up her phone and said, he just gave us our witnesses. The following Tuesday, Blake scheduled what he called a document review at a title company in town. I suspect Harbor Ridge forced it after my question at the lake. Blake sent me one message. Be there at 10. Bring ID. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I wore my dark gray suit. The one Margaret said made me look like a bank president. I polished my shoes. I put Laura's little silver teacher pin in my pocket. Not because anyone would see it, because I wanted my daughter with me when I finished what her husband had started. Denise and I arrived 5 minutes early. The conference room had a long table, a coffee machine in the corner, and framed prints of covered bridges on the wall. Blake sat at the far end beside 2 Harbor Ridge representatives, a title officer, and a younger woman I recognized from his real estate office. He looked annoyed when Denise walked in with me. He said, I thought this was a family matter. Denise set her briefcase on the table. It became something else when you presented yourself as authorized to sell property you do not own. The title officer stopped reaching for her coffee. Blake laughed once. That's dramatic. Denise opened her folder. Let's keep it simple. I watched his face carefully. I had seen that look hundreds of times across county counters. A man who had built a house of words suddenly noticing someone else brought paper. Denise placed the first document on the table. This is the recorded warranty deed for the Hartwell Lake property, transferred from Harold Whitaker to Samuel Whitaker and Margaret Whitaker in 1984. After Margaret's death, her interest transferred into the Whitaker Family Trust, with Samuel Whitaker as sole trustee. There has been no subsequent transfer. The title officer leaned forward. Blake said, Laura was their only heir. Laura was loved, Denise said. She was not an owner. The room went quiet. Denise placed the second document down. This is the family occupancy agreement signed by Mr. Morrison and Laura Morrison 4 years ago. It grants permission to reside on the property. It expressly states that no ownership interest is created. It terminates 60 days after Laura's death, unless renewed by the trustee. The Harbor Ridge project manager turned his head toward Blake. Blake's jaw tightened. That was just a formality. No, I said. It was a warning label. Everyone looked at me then. I had not planned to speak yet, but the words came out steady. You signed it because you wanted a free place to live. You ignored it because you wanted an expensive place to sell. Blake's face flushed. I maintained that house. You changed locks on a house you didn't own. I made improvements. You removed my wife's belongings. I was trying to move forward. You tried to make me sign a deed at my daughter's funeral. That one landed. The young woman from his office lowered her eyes. The title officer froze with her pen above her notepad. One of the Harbor Ridge men whispered something I could not hear. Blake looked at Denise. He's grieving. He's confused. And there it was, the last card. The one people play when an older person refuses to be pushed, confused, emotional, unstable, too old to understand what is happening to his own life. Denise slid the quitclaim deed across the table. This is the document you handed Mr. Whitaker in the church fellowship hall. We have 3 witnesses who saw you do it. We also have your text messages instructing him to bring identification today. Would you like to explain why you asked a man you considered confused to sign away property worth approximately $1.4 million? $1.4 million. Blake had never said the number out loud to me. Hearing it spoken in that clean little conference room made everything sharper. That was what my daughter's memories had become to him. A number with a decimal point. Harbor Ridge's attorney, who had been silent until then, closed his folder. He asked Blake, Do you have any recorded authority to act for this property? Blake did not answer. The attorney repeated, Any deed, power of attorney, trustee appointment, probate order, signed listing authority from the owner, anything? Blake stared at the table. The silence was not empty. It was full of every lie he had told. Finally, he said, "Laura told me it would be ours." For one moment, I saw something almost human cross his face. Not remorse, fear. Fear that charm had reached the end of the road. I reached into my pocket and touched Laura's teacher pin. Then I said, "Laura told me once she hoped you would learn to love a home without calculating what it could become." I guess she was still hoping. Blake looked at me then, and for the first time since my daughter died, he had no performance left. Denise placed the final notice on the table. "This is formal notice of termination of occupancy. Mr. Morrison has 30 days to vacate the property. He is to return all personal property belonging to Samuel Whitaker or the Whitaker Family Trust. Any attempt to enter into contracts concerning the property will be referred to the appropriate licensing board and, if necessary, law enforcement." The Harbor Ridge attorney stood up. He said their company was withdrawing from any discussion related to the property. He said they had been provided information by Mr. Morrison that now appeared unreliable. That was a polite way to say Blake had poisoned his own well. The title officer gathered the blank closing forms and slid them into a drawer. Just like that, the sale that Blake had imagined, bragged about, and built his next life around vanished without a signature. He looked at me and said, quietly now, "Sam, can we talk?" I thought of him standing over me in the church hall. I thought of Margaret's quilt gone from the couch. I thought of Laura's photo in a box by the door. I said, "You had months to talk. You chose papers. So did I." Denise and I walked out together. Outside, the town was doing what towns do. A delivery truck blocked half the street. 2 women came out of the bakery carrying coffee. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked like the world had not just shifted under one man's feet. I sat in my truck for a while before starting it. I did not feel happy. That may surprise some of you. I felt relieved, yes. Vindicated, maybe. But happiness is not the word for watching your daughter's husband expose how little he understood the woman he married. Consequences came quickly after that. Harbor Ridge sent a formal letter apologizing for any trespass during the site evaluation. Blake's real estate office opened an internal review. By the end of the month, his license was under complaint for misrepresenting authority to sell property. I did not call his clients. I did not post online. I did not stand in the town square and tell people what he had done. I did not need to. The truth traveled on its own legs. The neighbors had seen the cars at the lake. The title company had seen the documents. Harbor Ridge had lawyers. The church had witnesses who remembered him cornering me by the lemon bars. A lie that large does not disappear quietly when it collapses. It sends dust through every room it touched. Blake moved out on the 29th day. I drove to the lake house after he left. Denise told me to wait until the locksmith met me there, and this time I listened. The house smelled wrong when I opened the door. Too much cologne, not enough lemon oil. There were pale squares on the walls where pictures had hung. The porch swing was leaning behind the shed, one chain missing. Margaret's lilac bench was in the mud near the trash bins. The peonies were trampled, but not dead. That mattered to me. On the kitchen counter sat 3 cardboard boxes. The first had Margaret's quilts. The second had Laura's school tubs, the ones labeled by year. The third held smaller things, recipe cards, Christmas ornaments, the bluegill photo, my father's sweatshirt, and a note from Blake written on the back of a real estate flyer. It said, "I thought I was protecting my future. I know now I was selling hers. I'm sorry." I read it twice. Then I set it down. Forgiveness is a word people like to spend quickly when they are not the ones who paid for the damage. I am not saying I never forgave him. I am saying forgiveness did not put the porch swing back up. It did not unchange the locks. It did not bring Laura back. It did not make Margaret's peonies stand straight again. So I did the next honest thing. I carried the boxes inside. I rehung the bluegill photo. I washed Margaret's bench. I put the teacher pin on the mantle beneath Laura's picture. Then I went out back with a shovel and worked around the peonies until the light started to fade. A week later, Blake came by. He looked smaller. Not physically, maybe, but in that way a man looks smaller when confidence no longer does the walking for him. He stood at the edge of the porch and asked if he could speak to me. I almost said no, but Laura had loved him once, and some part of me needed to understand why. So I let him stand there. He said he had taken a job in Indiana, not real estate, something with a logistics company. He said he was leaving town. He said he knew he had no right to ask anything, but there was one question that had been eating at him. If I had come to you after Laura died, he said, and asked for help, instead of trying to take control, would things have gone differently? I looked past him at the lake. The evening water was flat and silver. The porch swing moved slightly in the breeze, repaired now, creaking the way it always had. Yes, I said. They would have. He swallowed. I would have given you time, I told him. I would have helped you find a place. I might have let you stay through winter. We could have packed Laura's things together. We could have remembered her as two people who loved her. He nodded, but he did not look at me. But I would never have given you what wasn't yours, I said. Respect opens doors, Blake. Entitlement locks them. He wiped his face with his hand. I did love her, he said. I know, I answered. But you loved what you wanted more. That was the last honest thing I ever said to him. He left a minute later. No handshake, no hug. Some endings do not need ceremony. They need the sound of a truck backing out of a driveway and not coming back. Now I sit on that porch most evenings. I am looking at the lake as I tell you this, brothers and sisters, sons and daughters, anyone who has ever been mistaken for weak because you were quiet. The lilacs are blooming again. The peonies came back crooked but alive. Laura's old students sent me letters after they heard I was keeping the house. One of them, a grown woman now, wrote that Mrs. Morrison had once told her, a home was not a place you owned, but a place where your best memories knew where to find you. That sounds like my girl. I have thought a lot about silence since all this happened. There is the silence of fear, yes. I know that one. I felt it in the hospital hallway when the doctor came toward me with his face already arranged. I felt it in the church when people said Laura was gone, and my mind refused to understand the shape of those words. But there is another silence, the silence of counting, the silence of watching, the silence of a man who knows where the deed is, where the agreement is, where the truth is, sleeping in a folder, while a liar exhausts himself making noise. Do not confuse those silences. And do not confuse kindness with permission. Blake believed that because I loved my daughter, I would let him rewrite her life. He believed because I was old, I would be grateful for whatever corner he allowed me to stand in. He believed because I did not shout, I did not have a voice. He was wrong about all of it. The loudest person in a room is not always the strongest. Sometimes the strongest person is the one who can stand there with a broken heart, put the evidence in order, and wait for the right table, the right witnesses, and the right question. Do you have any recorded authority? That was all it took. Not rage, not revenge, not cruelty, just the truth, laid flat under fluorescent lights. So I want to ask you something, family. If someone tried to take the home you built, the memories you protected, the proof of your whole life, would you have told the truth immediately, right there in the church hall? Or would you have waited until they put the lie in writing? If you think I did the right thing by staying calm and letting the documents speak, comment the number 1. If you think I should have stopped Blake the moment he changed the locks, comment 2. And if you think taking him down in front of the title company was too much, comment 3. Tell me where you are listening from too. City, state, country, whatever you feel comfortable sharing. I like knowing how far a quiet porch story can travel. And if you have ever been treated like you were worthless by someone who had no idea what you carried, tell me what happened. Tell me what you wish you had said. Tell me whether the truth finally came out. Because sometimes, down there in the comments, one person's story becomes another person's courage. A home is more than walls and paperwork, but caring for it sometimes means protecting the truth with patience instead of anger. When someone mistakes your quiet heart for weakness, remember that dignity can speak softly and still stand firm. Keep your memories close, treat people with respect, and let love guide even the hardest goodbyes.